So, good evening to all of you. Today is the first class on Arab Uprising, and it is just an introductory class uh, to understand why, firstly, I'm using the term Arab Uprising and not Spring. Secondly, what were the main countries which were involved? And thirdly, what happened to these countries? It is a very simplistic class. We'll go into the case studies of Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Syria, one by one, week by week, so that we understand the history, society, culture, politics in a much more nuanced manner and shed light into understanding why the outcome of Arab uprising was not as believed or expected initially. So the first, as you can see, it is insight into Arab uprisings. I have not used the term Arab Spring. There are several reasons behind it. At least there are four reasons behind it. So we will take into consideration all of them, and we'll also, because you have to link theory to any kind of international relations discourse that you are studying. So we will learn the theory behind it also. As you all know, my name is Dr. Shubda Chaudhary, and my book has been published on the silent revolution at Tahrir Square. So, when we will be discussing about Egypt, I will be discussing about my own experiences of the uprising in Egypt and why it shouldn't or couldn't be called a revolution, what happened so many years down the line, or what is the entire aspect of it. So, as you can see, the first thing that you have to take into consideration is that here is Southern Europe. You can see Portugal, Spain, Italy, Turkey. And from here, which is the Mediterranean Sea is Mediterranean, as we have discussed. It means middle of the earth. And I'm stuck. So, not there. So, Mediterranean Sea is the etymology or the origin of the term is middle of the earth. So, that is almost in the middle. So, it's called as Mediterranean Sea. Here you can see it's Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Oman, Yemen, and here is Somalia. So there are a lot of uh, countries that are in the Arab world, and most of them had been colonized by either the British or the French, apart from, say, uh, Libya, which was colonized by Italians during the time of Mussolini, and Ethiopia also. Apart from that, your Morocco, Tunisia, Syria, Lebanon, uh, they all were colonized by the French, Algeria also. Libya, Egypt, Saudi, Iraq, Jordan, all of them have had the colonial repercussion of the British. So, all of these countries, what I want you to remember very strongly is all of these countries are very different from the other. Just say when you travel in India, there are various ways of speaking Hindi. A North Indian will speak Hindi in a different way. And that too, when I say North India, a Bihari will speak Hindi in a different way, a Punjabi will speak Hindi in a different way, Haryanvi will speak Hindi in a different way, though it's the same Hindi. And South Indians, again, I don't want to club, but in Tamil Nadu, there's a different kind of accent of Hindi, in Kerala, different. So, in the same way, though Arabic is the language which is spoken here, there are different accents of Arabic. The societies are different. Those who were colonized by the French have a different kind of social setup. Those who were colonized by the British have a different kind of social setup. Uh, Apart from that, they have different kind of demography, ethnicity, and different kinds of population and their own sentimental concerns which are there. And so the history of each of these countries is very complicated. And as I have told before, you cannot understand international relations without understanding history of it. So today's class, we are just going to look at ki Arab uprising tha kya and why did it take place. To start with, why am I not using the word Arab Spring or Arab Revolution? Why am I not using that word? There are several reasons behind it. Etymology, as you know, the meaning of etymology is origin of a particular word. That what is the origin of this word? What is the history or the origin? if your name is something, what is the meaning of your name? Why did your parents name it? Does it signify something? Like Shubda signifies someone who is auspicious for others. And nevertheless, it was from a Bengali book written by Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay, which was Shubhoda. So from there the name came, which is mine. Uh, but the root of my name is Sanskrit. In the same way, in English language or in most of the Germanic languages, we have discussed that the root language from where they grow or evolve is either Greek or Latin. So Arab uprisings is a better term. It's a much more post colonial term than Arab Spring or Arab Revolution. Why not a revolution? Because revolution is when the entire structure of society changes. For example, when the French Revolution took place in 1789, though it took them 30 plus years, but they wanted to fight against monarchy as the structure of the state, and they wanted to have a separation of the church from the state. They wanted to have democracy. In the same way, so that was the transition. In the same way, when American Revolution started in 1766, when supposedly United States of America was it declared its independence from the British rule on 4th of July, they again did not want to be just a colony of the British Empire, even though they were Brits themselves. But they fought against it, and they introduced the concept of a president, who was George Washington, who was the first president of US, and USA became a democratic country instead of a colony or a dominion status. So in politics, whenever you have a revolution, your entire structure changes. So military changes to democracy, or theocracy changes to democracy, or democracy changes to authoritarianism, or vice versa. So it is not a revolution because there was no as such structural change that took place in the political sphere or political control in these countries. So the term revolution is wrong for it. Now, there are reasons why Arab Spring was called as Arab Spring, which is the wrong etymology, which is mostly used by the Westerners. It is an allusion. What is allusion? Allusion means reference. When you refer to a certain idea that has happened in time, allusion or reference to the revolution of 1848. So, what happened in 1848? These countries that you can see, mostly France, Ireland, Hungary, the German Confederation, the Italian states, Denmark, all of them had massive revolution because in 1846, as few of the historians said, that there was a massive famine and it became very, very difficult for the poor and the urban poor because industrialization had taken place. उनको जीने में बहुत दिक्कत हो रही थी, उनके अपनी ज़रूरतें थी जो सरकार वहाँ की जो भी फॉर्म में थी was not completely endowing it to them. So people started this particular series of protest movements in 1848. It was called as the springtime of the nations or springtime of the people. And ये democracy के लिए, secularism के लिए these protests were. So the moment Arab uprising started, and they were also for democracy and also for separation of, like a much more of individual voice and less of human rights abuse. So Western scholars immediately used the terms Arab Spring. And it suddenly became rampant. Everyone was just terming it as Arab Spring, Arab Spring, Arab Spring, without even knowing the history of why the term spring is used, because it is a European connotation. There are several criticisms of why one should not use the term Arab Spring. Firstly, the Western commentators had coined the term Arab Spring instead of using a term uprising or demonstration, remonstration, whatever. But the Arabs themselves, those who were involved in the protest, They wanted karama, which is dignity, or revolution, which is thawra. And they used expressions like al-madar or al-arabi, which is Arab bitterness. So, for example, if you go to these countries, they will say, they don't know India, they'll say Al Hind. They have their own way of referring, they have their own vocabulary, they have their own language, and that is how they coin it. But because Arabic translation is not easily prevalent in the Western press and Western academia, it was considered and it was easy to say it as Arab Spring instead of using any of these Arabic words to denote it. This is the first criticism. The second criticism is, as you can see, the gentleman on my right, his name was Edward Said. Edward Said had given a certain kind of perception or a certain kind of theory. He was one of the first post-colonial scholars. Post-colonial scholars are scholars who have been born and brought up and who write about countries who were initially colonized but now are independent. So, for example, anyone who's writing from India, anyone who's writing from any of these colonized states who are now independent, and now they're writing from their own lens, from their own perspective. So, Edward said, so first of all, you have to understand that what is the term. Like, for example, if this is West and this is East, if we are talking about geography and geographical entities, and I'm blinking, okay. So if you talk about that, so the West is called as Occident, and the East is called as the Orient. So when the Western countries look at the Eastern countries, they have their own terminologies and they club all the Eastern countries together, calling it the Orient. The same way, if someone from the East, so right now we are in India and we are looking towards the West, whatever perception we have, that will be called as looking at the Occident. So, in his own words, for Edward Said, Orientalism was a certain kind of racism that the West often adopted by looking at the East. And he called it Orientalism. It was a certain kind of ethnocentrism, racial discrimination, or stereotyping or prejudice of, or a Western style of looking at the Orient and the people who are there, which are which was often very dominating and very restricting in its analysis. So Edward Said said that because many Western scholars like Herbert Spencer, he believed that the whites were able to colonize the world, be it French, Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, British, because they were much more smarter than the blacks or the browns. So there is a certain kind of superiority and there is a certain kind of ignorance also, which leads to that kind of superiority. So when the Western scientists or scholars look at the Orient with a racial eye, it is called as Orientalism. And Edward Said stated that history is never neutral. It is always written by those who have power, and mostly history is written by the West. Today, you look or pick up any topic or any subject, be it political science, geography, sociology, history itself, or English, whatever subject you start from the very basic of NCRT, you will have a father who will be a Western scholar, someone, and then very limited times you'll have a mother. But at the same time, this father will be an urban elite white guy of 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, whatever. And that is how most of sociology, philosophy, political science is written. History is written, right? So the Western centric terminology created has always created that in even any time if there is a protest or uprising taking place, they immediately relate it to how the Westerners understand these kinds of uprising. So they understood the Spring Revolution of 1848. So let's call it Arab Spring. That was the easy thing to do and the incorrect thing to do. Edward Said himself, he was born on 1st of November 1935 in Jerusalem. He was a Palestinian Christian and he passed away on 24th of September 2003. He was the founder of post-colonial studies and he became an American Palestinian academic. His father served in the army, so he got citizenship through that. And he was able to, while his study was, he came from a class that was able to afford him diversity in terms of studying at that point of time. We're talking about 1935. Like Amartya Sen was born in 1933 and he's still alive. Edward Said passed away, unfortunately, due to leukemia. So, as a Palestinian American academic, he wrote a lot about the Palestinian cause, but he also questioned, as a literary critic, he questioned literature. Now, what is literature? Literature is not just books that you study in terms of fiction or non-fiction, or plays of Shakespeare, or any kind of drama. That's just not literature. Literature is any kind of theoretical study which is done about a concept, and then considerable amount of content is produced to make it the absolute truth or narrative. So he studied and criticized the society and cultural politics which was there in the West, and how the West looked and gave the entire scrutiny or absolute truthfulness of what is happening in the East. For example, we had in 1857, we had the revolt of 1857. In our textbooks, you will study the revolt of 1857. But if you go to the British textbooks, and if they have mention of it, mostly they don't have mention of it, but they'll use the word mutiny. Mutiny एक skirmish होता है, which is not at the same level as a revolution. तो उसमें वो वहां पे बोलते हैं कि छोटा मोटा skirmish ही तो हुआ था, but it was a massive revolution. जिसके कारण ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी had to lose its power. It was dissolved. 1860 में the Indian Penal Code was formed, and then the British Crown took over. There was an entire transition of leadership. So एक छोटी मोटी skirmish से तो वो होगा नहीं. But if you look at history, they will say it was a mutiny. So Edward Said throughout his life, in his first, like as you can see in one of his famous quotes, here it is, that Orientalism can be discussed and analyzed as a corporate institution. Corporate in the sense that it is capitalistic in nature. For dealing with the Orient, now you will say, how is it capitalistic in nature? If I am, for example, coming from a conflict zone and I go to one of these Western countries and I want the stereotypes that are already prevalent in those Western countries to continue, and I will be getting paid for it because I have also been the victim of it. So I will continue and talk about only those negative parts of it instead of the holistic reality of times changing. So, for example, who was that comedian who went to the Kennedy Center for one of the stand-up comedians from India who went to US, who stays in US? Do you remember his name? Veer Das, I guess.
Veer Das, yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So he gave a, like a completely anti-state, administration rhetoric in one of the most elite centers or platforms in the US, named after Kennedy. And though it is a dream for any artist to perform over there, but my certain grievance with his entire uh, narrative is that you know what sells and you're selling it. As simple as that. You know what sells and you're selling it. Without having any strong social, cultural, or even visceral connection anymore with the lived realities, because you signify a different kind of urban rich of India, a very privileged class. But you have become the spokesperson of the entire um, population, which is not as privileged and elite as you. So the stories or narratives of other victims has become a stand-up comedy in your narrative, because you know that sells, so you're selling it. That was my grievance. This is what how it is a capitalistic institution. And the West always authorizes what view. When I was in London and Arab Uprisings started, it started on 18th December 2010. And I didn't know at that point of time what was happening, or what was even the Arab world, or what is the history or sociology of it. I didn't know about it. And every newspaper was bombarded with anti-state rhetoric, anti Tunisian state, anti Egyptian state, anti Libyan state, anti Syrian state, all of it. Written by whom? Foreign journalists who might not even know Arabic as a language. So there was this concept of parachute journalism which came. Parachute journalism का मतलब क्या होता है कि अच्छा you see कि आज की ताज़ा खबर that you have a journalist who is sitting here and just पीछे वो just अभी अपने एरोप्लेन से पैराशूट से नीचे उतरा है और वो एकदम पूरा है with a camera and with everything, mic is ready and reporting about it in English for the English audience, and वो बता रहा है कि अच्छा ये पीछे बम फूटा आप देख सकते हैं लाइव 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 anything, and the episode is over and the war continues, but he's up and gone in the airplane back to where he came from. Any kind of insight into why it took place in the way it took place? एंड खुदा ना खास्ता बिल्कुल नहीं, आपकी कंट्री का इन्वॉल्वमेंट तो उसमें बात ही नहीं होगी. तो Edward Said talked about कि कैसे Western style of dominating and authoritatively talking about the Orient, even jokes like "Acha, Indians they are snake charmers, or they own or pet elephants, or India is the land of Kama Sutra." These are all very Oriental discourses. In the same way, it was, for example, your Aladdin. All of it is a very Oriental discourse, that this is how West Asia or Middle East should look like. And this is a narrative of it. And genie and all of this, and flying carpets and all of that. So those are, even though it is form of entertainment, but often the form of entertainment has soft power to create racial stereotypes. So that is why Arab Spring as a term should not be used. This is the book. As you can see, the cover of the book, this is the way West Asia or Middle East. They call it Middle East. Why? Kiska middle? If you're in US, so the east of it, uska Middle East. If you're in UK, then uska Middle East. From India, it is not Middle East. हमारा Middle East क्या होगा? East तो इधर है, अरुणाचल प्रदेश. उसके आगे उस तरफ जाएंगे, then हमारा Middle East तो कहीं Pacific Ocean के साइड आएगा. But ये सारी countries तो नहीं है. So that's why we use term which is West Asia. We don't use the term Middle East. Post-colonial Indian scholars, they use the term West Asia to refer to what is called as Middle East. Now look at the entire elaborate politics of this art. Like the women lying down, the very expensive carpets, and they're playing their own, or they're just lying over, and there's just look at the entire mural architecture which is there, and the chandeliers and lamps and all of it, and how all of them are sitting and they're dancing and looking at it, and there's this man behind who's looking at something, and this woman is not even having she's not even covering her breasts. So that kind of narrative, so every picture is political, every picture has politics of it. So what kind of perception is guaranteed from this kind of art? That you have your own, कि अच्छा यहाँ पे people don't do anything, they're just laying out and entertaining or having hookah or dancing, having a good time. That is it. One man and so many women. This was the entire that's why this one of the covers of this book was chosen, because it was a critique of this kind of narrative, that there's more life to what you signify through the Western lens. The third criticism of Arab Spring was that they call it the MENA region, which is Middle East and North Africa, and they homogenize the entire term in the singular word of Arab. As I told you in the map before, every country is different. They have their own history of colonialism, and before that they have their own state structure, they have their own demography. When you use the entire word Arab, you cannot club every country, Egypt and Libya and all of that, through the term Arab Spring, that because it's oversimplification and a very jaundiced point of view, that every other Arab is same, they are culturally, ethnically similar, and they have the same kind of history, culture, religion and language. It is wrong. There's massive diversity. So just as we in a very racial way say, acha, South India matlab Madras, a lot of North Indians say it in that way. That is a very wrong way of looking at Southern India. So in the same way, it is a very oversimplified perspective also, which should not be accepted. The fourth criticism of Arab Spring was, like, if you look from semantic perspective, semantic in the sense that from the perspective of symbols, signs, language, it is not informative, because according to Oxford University Dictionary, in 2005 also there were short-lived pro-democracy movements that took place in West Asia. The same term cannot be used for 2010 also. There are two different kinds of movements. So once, if you have already referred to it as Arab Spring, I will fear if there will be some, protest movement which will start. They'll start saying, "Oh, the resurrection of the Arab Spring has taken place." Resurrection of it, as if there is no terminology away from that narrative which is possible to say. Now, let us start with. We'll discuss about Tunisia in very superficial way, because we'll discuss them in detail later. So we'll talk about Tunisia, we'll talk about Egypt, we'll talk about Libya and Syria. So hua kya? What exactly happened? As you can see towards my right is a 26-year-old. Though it's debated somewhere, some sources say he's 24, he was. Some sources say he's 26. So what happened? On 18th of December 2010, he was a vegetable seller in Sidi Bouzid, which is a small town in Tunisia. Now, if you, for example, after doing a graduation, you start selling fruits on the cart, it shows that you are unemployed. It shows that the demography or labor demographic dividend of the country was not utilized. It shows that you'll definitely be in depression and anxiety. And I don't mean it superficially, because you have invested more in your education than what you'll be earning. I'm not trying to label that there's a social stratification of labor, but just imagine the mental state of a man who studied graduation and eventually he had to take care of his family also, because hardcore patriarchal society, and he has nothing, no form of employment. All he can do is sell fruits and vegetables on the road. And जिस तरीके से पुलिस भी हफ्ता लेती थी, एंड जितना इसका अर्निंग होता नहीं था वो पुलिस वाले ले लेते थे, इसको जो लाइसेंस कार्ड dwellers को होता नहीं है. So one day this was going on and on and on, and he was completely, um, devastated. He was not able to make a lot for his living. So I will tell you in the class of Tunisian uprising that there are many subsets of what happened to him. But as you can see, there's a photo of a man who has self-immolated himself, जो अपने आप को जला दिया. He had a struggle with police one of the days, and he just, out of anger, took petrol and burnt himself, even though burning oneself is a sin in Islam. And then everyone followed suit, and people tried to save him. He couldn't be. He was massively injured, as you can see. And in Tunisia, it started a Jasmine revolution. Now, why Jasmine? Jasmine is basically, um, there are two narratives about it. First, jasmine is the national flower of Tunisia. That is why they use the term jasmine. Second, the president Ben Ali wanted to signify Jasmine revolution, or he allowed that term to be used because he wanted to uh, state that it was a bloodless coup that took place, and he gave up power and went to Saudi Arabia. So the Tunisia government wanted to stall the protest. They used violence on all the street demonstrations that were happening. They tried social political concessions also. But eventually, the president, Zin al Abdin Ben Ali, had to step down on January the 14th, 2011. The unemployment rate, as you can see, was very high and is very high in Tunisia still. Things have, after the Arab uprising, they have grown even much more expensive for Tunisians. But irrespective of that, Tunisia is one of the only countries where the Arab uprising was supposedly successful, and it was not taken over by any other, it was not hijacked by any other form of military or theocracy, which will be in Egypt or other places, or no civil war broke out. So Tunisia was here. Muhammad Bouazizi was from here, Sidi Bouzid, and this is where he burnt himself. An entire of Tunisia. Now, if you see it on the map, it will feel as if, oh my God, this is very huge as a country, but these are not bigger than Delhi NCR regions. They are very small. The Egypt is huge and Libya is huge, but other countries, they are small. They're very small. So this took place into October 2011. Tunisians participated in the first free election that took place for the first time in the country, because it was completely a military authoritarian government. And they formed a council, and they started with the process of drafting their own constitution. They chose a president and prime minister who took office in 2011. They had their own constitution for the first time in 2014. And in October, November 2019, Tunisia became the first country that underwent a transitional, uh, from one democratic elected leadership to another. A peaceful transition took place in Tunisia. In none of the other countries it has taken place. And Ben Ali had to resign, and he then flew off to Saudi Arabia. Now let us see what happened to Egypt. So Egypt is very important, A, because Egyptians, like, they, just as your Indus Valley civilization or Mesopotamia civilization. So Egyptian civilization is also considered to be the cradle of other civilizations. Nile River was the birthplace of many civilizations. You have the pharaohs, and you have the stories of Cleopatra and mummies and all of it. Egypt has had a very different kind of cultural influence than Tunisia also, because Tunisia was colonized by the French. Egypt has been very, very British. In fact, when I went to older Cairo, like old Cairo, it was very similar to, the architecture was very, very Victorian. Very Victorian. And that was in itself a reminder of British architecture, which you can see in Mumbai, you can see also in parts of Delhi, and obviously in Calcutta, all of that. So Cairo is over here. Here at the coast is Alexandria. It's very famous for its seafood. If you go there, do have it. But it is very also famous for its library and the museum. That is actually one of your father of geography, Eratosthenes, was working as a librarian in the Alexandria library during 400 BC or whatever at that point of time. So Cairo is here. So what happened in Egypt? Now, Egypt has a different narrative. पहले तो कि अच्छा हाँ, we are the cultural ancestors of पहले Tunisia में revolution हो गया was the first issue. The second was in Egypt you had the military dictator Hosni Mubarak, who was the president for 30 plus years, and social media, Facebook, Twitter played a very pivotal role on 25th of January. So see the timeline. 14th of January 2011, the president of Tunisia resigns. 25th of January, Egyptians come to Tahrir Square, or the huge Maidan, which is maybe double yours, like, or maybe the entire of Connaught Place. That is there. Wahan pe they come together and they start revolting against the military dictator. Egyptian government comes on their camels. Government in the sense police forces and army on their camels. Like the British come on their horses. In reality, you will go and see it. I'm not joking. So they came on the camels, and because camels also, like, if they push you, you'll die immediately because of the force. So the Egyptian policemen came on the camels, and the protesters were violently. It was a very violent uh, loss of life that took place. And for several days, the demonstrations continued, and eventually Hosni Mubarak initially was not ready to give up power. He wanted his son to be the next president, who was not from military background but was a businessman. But so the internal apparatus also was very anti Hosni Mubarak. But eventually he had to give over. You can see Tahrir Square. These are all very expensive hotels. This is entire like Hilton and others. This is Tahrir Square. It's a huge Maidan, and you can see it is all covered with people, and everyone is there, and they are trying to protest, and they continued and they sat for days and days, and then finally on February the 11th, Mubarak had to resign after 30 more years, like odd years of his military service. And then there was an interim government which was formed. Then they had a democratic election. They had someone called as President Morsi from Muslim Brotherhood who came into power, but Morsi was later, after 1 year, in 2013, July, deposed. There was another bloody coup that took place, and military came into power, and Abdel al Fattah al Sisi is now the president since 2013 of Egypt. So the protests in Egypt were not successful. They had military, then a short interlude of democracy for a year, and then military. And a lot of people lost their lives. So that was Egypt, that happened. Then comes Libya. Libya is an entire desert. There's no river over here. You can see seas, but there's no river. Libya became very, very profitable once oil was discovered over here. So Egypt doesn't have oil, Tunisia doesn't have oil. Libya, the politics of it was different because it had oil. And the president over here was Gaddafi. Gaddafi, who was once close friends with the West, very close friends with the West. And protests started against Gaddafi in February 2011, and they became armed revolt against him. And the rebel forces tried to fight against Libyan army, which was controlled by Gaddafi. But in the same time, US, UK, and most of the NATO countries, they immediately, in the name of humanitarian intervention, imposed a no-fly zone. मतलब Libyan airspace के through कोई flight नहीं जाएगी. And there'll be no trade in and out of Libya. Libya को बिल्कुल isolate कर दो. वो उन्होंने launch कर दिया कि हम गद्दाफी के forces को target करेंगे in the name of democracy promotion and in the name of humanitarian intervention, which created eventually led to the repercussion of a black market in Libya of oil, and it created a genesis of later ISIS and many others. NATO ne intervene kiya. NATO ne intervene kiya. All the Western countries were like, yes, 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 we should intervene. We should intervene. What you see right now in Ukraine, and क्योंकि oil था. And Gaddafi, who was once very close friends with the West, suddenly became an enemy. And he was eventually forced out of power. He was killed mercilessly, just like Mussolini was killed mercilessly, उल्टा टंगा के उसको लोगों ने मारा था, वैसे ही Gaddafi was killed mercilessly by people when his entire body was put into a huge pipe and people like scummed it and it was messy. This happened in October 2011. तो सर्टे में वो पाया गया, रिबेल फोर्सेस ने कंट्रोल लिया और उसके बाद फिर ट्रांजिशनल नेशनल काउंसिल बनी यहाँ पे। और लिबिया आज का दो पार्ट्स में डिवाइड होके रह चुका है। इनके दो अलग अलग गवर्नमेंट्स हैं और अ सर्टेन काइंड ऑफ सिविल वॉर और लैक ऑफ सेफ्टी इज स्टिल देयर इन लिबिया। बहुत ज्यादा रिपोर्ट्स न्यूज में नहीं आता है कि क्या एग्जैक्टली exactly हो रहा है इन लिबिया, नहीं हो रहा है, ऑल ऑफ दैट। नेक्स्ट इज सीरिया। सीरिया एज यू कैन सी ये यहाँ पे है। Lebanon or Syria initially they were one. Lebanon then carved in, जब they were colonized by the French, then Lebanon became a different territory. यहाँ इजराइल बगल में है, इनके बीच में ये contested territory है called as Golan Heights. सीरिया के जस्ट ऊपर टर्की है। सीरिया और टर्की के रिलेशंस काफी फ्रेजाइल रहे हैं। अब सीरिया के पास एज यू कैन सी यूफ्रेट्स रिवर यहाँ से पास कर रही है, जो मेसोपोटामियन सिविलाइजेशन का टिग्रिस और यूफ्रेट्स वाज द जेनेसिस ऑफ इट। तो और सीरिया का कैपिटल दमास्कस है जो यहाँ है। अब सीरिया में क्या हुआ? सीरिया में बशार अल-असाद वाज एन ऑप्थेल्मोलॉजिस्ट इन लंदन। उसने शादी की थी। उसके मतलब उसके फादर थे हाफिज अल-असाद फ्रॉम द बाथ पार्टी। वो प्रेसिडेंट थे, मिलिट्री के हेड थे। बशार को कोई मतलब नहीं था, ही डिडंट वांट टू बी द प्रेसिडेंट। वो पहले ही मतलब कि हम आई सर्जन बनेंगे एंड ही वेंट टू यूके, ही गॉट मैरिड देयर, सेटल्ड ओवर देयर। बट इससे पहले जो बड़ा भाई था हु हैड टू बिकम द प्रेसिडेंट, ही डाइड इन अ कार क्रैश। छोटा भाई नाम माहिर अल असाद, उसको उतने लोग ट्रस्ट नहीं करते थे, सो दे फर्स्ट एंड दे बॉट हिम बैक इन 2000 कि नहीं, यू हैव टू बी द प्रेसिडेंट ऑफ सीरिया। ही स्टार्टेड विथ revolutionizing information technology over here, and Syria again does not produce oil, and but Syria is very close to Iran and Russia, and to a certain extent China. So यहाँ एक छोटा सा गांव था दरा करके। दरा में बच्चों ने जाके स्कूल का जो कैंपस का वॉल नहीं होता है, वहां पे बच्चों ने जाके, क्योंकि उन्होंने देखा कि सब इजिप्ट में बोल रहे हैं, टुनीशिया में बोल रहे हैं, तो वहां पे उन्होंने बोल दिया कि डाउन विद द रिजीम, वो अरबिक में लिखा। पुलिस ने आके अरेस्ट कर लिया बच्चे और उनको पेरेंट्स को, फिर उसके खिलाफ प्रोटेस्ट हो गया। एक छोटे से गांव से शुरू हुआ बात, डेमेस्कस और अलेप्पो सब जगह फैला। उसके बाद फिर एट द सेम टाइम काफी सारे फॉरेन इन्फिल्ट्रेटर्स भी आना शुरू कर दिए सीरिया में, फ्रॉम मैली एंड चाड, एंड पीपल वे पेड लाइक £1000 अ डे। £1000 मतलब 1 लाख रुपए से ज्यादा, टू गो एंड फाइट, बी अ रिबेल इन अ डिफरेंट वॉर एंड फाइट अगेंस्ट। तो ये सारी चीजें चली। फिर इनका भी अपना जो असाद रजीम का कंट्रोल मोनोपोली है वो भी चलने लगा। उनकी भी आर्मी से कई लोगों ने डिफेक्ट कर लिया, और जो सीरियन आर्मी थी फिर वो अपना बैकलैश शुरू की। तो देन इट बिकेम वेरी वेरी बैड एंड इट वाज वेरी डिफिकल्ट। व्हाई इज इट इम्पोर्टेंट टू नो राइट नाउ? बिकॉज जो आपका 4 से 5 अर्थक्वेक हुआ है वो सिर्फ टर्की में नहीं, वो सीरिया में भी हुआ है। बट वी डोंट टॉक अबाउट सीरिया। व्हाई? Very limited photos of the earthquake from Syria. So anyway, तो असाद did not let go of the power. असाद एक minority sect से आता है which is Alawite. तो इस्लाम दो भागों में डिवाइडेड है, शिया और सुन्नी। शिया का एक ऑफशूट है अलावाइट, जो माइनॉरिटी है, जो मेजोरिटी सुन्नी को वहां पे कंट्रोल करता है सीरिया में। तो लोग अलावाइट प्रेसिडेंशियल रूल के खिलाफ थे। वन ऑफ द रीजंस वाज दैट। तो इसके खिलाफ इन्होंने शुरू किया। इंटरनेशनल कम्युनिटी में भी डिवीजन शुरू हो गया सीरिया को लेके, बिकॉज लिबिया में जो नेटो ने किया था वो सक्सेसफुल नहीं रहा था। ब्लैक मार्केट क्रिएट कर दिया था, आईसिस क्रिएट कर। रशिया और चाइना ने वीटो कर दिया यूएन सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल में जब हुआ इसके ऊपर रेजोल्यूशन कि असाद रजीम के ऊपर प्रेशर डालना है नहीं डालना है, या फॉरेन इंटरवेंशन करना है कि नहीं करना है। पीस मॉनिटर्स भी काफी आए अरब लीग से। उसके बाद वायलेंस बढ़ा, फॉरेन फंडिंग, आर्म्स, बहुत सारी चीजें यहाँ पे, और सिविल वॉर अभी भी कंट्रोल में है। नेक्स्ट क्लास में नेक्स्ट जो है ये सऊदी अरेबिया के जस्ट बगल में कतर दिख रहा है आपको, जहां से अल जजीरा न्यूज चैनल है, उसके जस्ट बगल में उससे भी छोटा, लाइक इतना छोटू, देयर इज दिस आइलैंड कॉल्ड एज बहरेन। बहरेन का कैपिटल है मनामा। तो बहरेन में जो है, यहाँ पे क्या इशू हुआ, बहरेन की जो शिया मेजोरिटी थी, और इनको जो रूल कर रहे हैं वो सुन्नीस थे, अल खलीफा अल थानी जो इनकी रॉयल फैमिली है, तो उसके खिलाफ प्रोटेस्ट शुरू हुआ कि हमें डेमोग्राफी का प्रोटेस्ट चाहिए, कि जो शिया मेजोरिटी है वो फील करती है कि वो मार्जिनलाइज्ड हैं, और दैट इज व्हाई दे वांट टू हैव देयर ओन डेमोक्रेसी एंड देयर ओन रिप्रेजेंटेशन। तो प्रोटेस्ट शुरू हुए रातों रात। देयर इज दिस डॉक्यूमेंट्री शाउटिंग इन द डार्क by Al Jazeera, which was made in Bahrain. What happened ki raton raat the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is headed by Saudi Arabia, they sent around 1,000 soldiers middle of the night and killed everyone, whoever was protesting. So I have also written, like, one of my chapters is going to be published in a book where I have talked about the political dementia which was seen in the case of Bahrain. Just a second. So as you can see, we discussed about we will talk about Baptism when we will talk about Syria. So it was a form of Arab socialism that developed in Iraq and Syria. And the party that came into power was the Ba'ath Party. Um, Hafiz al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad, they are from that party. उनका फिर इराक और सीरिया का डिवीजन हो गया पार्टी के स्ट्रक्चर और फंडिंग में, तो फिर देन दे सेपरेटेड. So in short, we studied कि Tunisia में it was successful, but the cost of living has become very, very expensive. Very expensive. Inflation rate right now in Tunisia is very high. But at the same time, the Tunisian assembly gives more representation to women, which is almost invisible in most of the Arab countries. In the case of Egypt, there was a uprising and a counter uprising and a massacre and many things which have been omitted while we are talking about the Egyptian history. Today, everything in Egypt is controlled by the military, be it hotels or be it resorts, be it roads, be it anything. They are creating a new Cairo, which will be looking like Dubai or Abu Dhabi. Completely Western, and Suez Canal trade is controlled by the Egyptian military. Anyone who passes through the Suez Canal has to pay taxes. So that money through tourism, which was obviously lost during the time of pandemic, is now back. Um, Egypt is right now also facing a massive amount of food insecurity because of the famine in Sinai next to the Nile Delta. And most of Egypt was the biggest importer of Ukrainian wheat. So after the Russia-Ukraine war, Egypt has to, the amount of money which has gone in buying wheat has doubled up, becoming very expensive for the economy. Um, the third country we studied was Libya, which is a desert with an oil rentier state system. Rentier state का मतलब क्या है कि oil जो है will, it is a fossil which will extinguish after some time. It will not continue for like, it's not non-conventional form of energy. ये हवा पानी की तरह नहीं है. वैसे हवा पानी भी अब उतना सुरक्षित नहीं है, but anyway. तो oil खत्म तो होगा 50 years 40 years down the line. तो वो रेंट पे ही एक तरीके से उसका जो प्रोडक्शन का जो बेनिफिट आ रहा है, जो पैसा कमा रहे हैं, इट इज काइंड ऑफ अ रेंट that the country is able to gain. The GDP is on rent. That is a rentier economy, which was of Libya, and that is why NATO, like without a second's doubt, went ahead and intervened. और सारी कंट्री में ऑयल नहीं है, तो वैसा कोई नेटो इंटरवेंशन स्ट्रांगली हुआ नहीं था. उसके बाद फिर आपने सीरिया का पढ़ा. सीरिया का केस अभी भी चल रहा है, सिविल वॉर अभी भी चल रहा है. बशर असाद विल नॉट लेट गो ऑफ हिज पावर. Russia is also supporting, Iran is also supporting, and the West is against the dictatorship of Bashar al-Assad. Both have their own reasons, which we will discuss in the case study. And in Bahrain, the protest was not even reported. Like middle of the night, 1,000 soldiers come, everyone is killed, over. So that is one of the repercussions that happened for Bahrain. Then it also happened in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, also in Yemen, also the aspects of Arab uprising took place. But when we will study country by country, we will discuss. So in the next class, we will study about Tunisia and what exactly happened. And there are many nuances to why Muhammad Bouazizi set himself on fire. बहुत nuances हैं. We'll discuss about all those nuances in the next class, and we'll also study a bit of history of um, Tunisia. So every week will be channelized into a short history of that country. Then Arab uprising क्या हुआ, क्यों हुआ, प्रेसिडेंट का हिस्ट्री क्या है, फिर वो प्रेसिडेंट जो डिपोज हुआ वो आज जिंदा है कि नहीं है, कहाँ है. फिर उसके बाद चेंजेस क्या हुए उस कंट्री में आफ्टर अरब अपराइजिंग. तो वो सारी चीजें हम पढ़ेंगे. We'll study the same way for Egypt, the same way for Libya, and the same way for Bahrain. And then one class we will have on studying about other non-reported cases of say Saudi Arabia या UAE या फिर Yemen. ये सब में क्या हुआ बहुत ज्यादा. So thank you for your presence.